Imagine being framed for a crime you didn't commit by someone who holds all the power, only to discover a hidden piece of evidence that turns the tables. David Carter, a hard-working chauffeur, finds himself trapped in a web of lies spun by Veronica Chambers, a wealthy socialite who will stop at nothing to save herself. As public outrage and prejudice rise against him, a forgotten dashcam becomes David's last hope for justice. What unfolds is a gripping tale of betrayal, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of truth. The sleek city skyline shimmered in the morning sun, a reflection of wealth and power that seemed unattainable to most. At its center stood Veronica Chambers, a woman who embodied this world of luxury and entitlement. Veronica was a striking figure, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer wardrobe making her instantly recognizable among the city's elite. She had spent her life climbing the social ladder, using charm and manipulation to maintain her position at the top. To those who knew her only in passing, Veronica was the picture of sophistication. But beneath the polished exterior lay a woman who wielded her privilege like a weapon, leaving others to bear the consequences of her mistakes. On the other side of town, in a modest neighborhood, David Carter's day started before sunrise. A hard-working man in his mid-30s, David was a dedicated chauffeur who prided himself on his honesty and work ethic. With deep brown skin, kind eyes, and a warm but reserved demeanor, David was the type of person who believed in earning everything through sheer determination. Life hadn't been easy. He balanced long hours driving for the city's wealthiest clients while supporting his family and saving for his daughter's college fund. Despite the challenges, David remained steadfast, holding on to his values and dignity no matter how much the world seemed stacked against him. The two couldn't have been more different, yet their lives intersected in a way neither could have anticipated. Veronica had hired David as her personal chauffeur months ago, impressed by his professionalism and ability to remain unobtrusive. She valued discretion in her staff, especially as she navigated her messy divorce and the scrutiny of the press. David, in turn, saw the job as a stepping stone, a way to provide for his family while keeping his head down. At first, their interactions were cordial, but distant. Veronica issued instructions curtly, never bothering to learn much about David beyond his name. David, accustomed to the brusque treatment of the wealthy, maintained his polite professionalism, even as he quietly observed the cracks in her polished facade. It wasn't long before David began to notice patterns in Veronica's behavior. She was often impatient, dismissive, and prone to blame others for even the smallest inconveniences. If her coffee order was incorrect, it was the barista's fault. If she ran late for an event, it was David's failure to predict traffic. Her temper flared easily, but it was her ability to mask her disdain with a charming smile that left David uneasy. One particular day stood out in David's memory. Veronica had been on her phone, berating an event planner for a minor oversight. Her voice was syrupy sweet at first, but quickly turned cold and cutting when the planner attempted to explain. "I don't care about your excuses," she had snapped, her manicured fingers tapping against the car door. "Fix it, or you're done." David had glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her expression calm as if nothing had happened. It was a moment that lingered with him, a quiet reminder of the imbalance of power between them. But David was no stranger to challenges. He had encountered condescending clients before, people who viewed him as little more than a cog in their well-oiled machines of luxury. What set Veronica apart was the calculated nature of her entitlement. She didn't just wield her privilege, she weaponized it. Still, David told himself it wasn't his battle to fight. He needed the job, and Veronica's unpredictable moods weren't his concern, as long as he could keep his distance. He focused on his work, taking pride in being a dependable provider for his wife and daughter. What David didn't know was that his integrity and hard work were about to be tested in a way he couldn't have imagined. Veronica's world of perfection was built on a fragile foundation, and when her recklessness led to a life-altering accident, she would do anything to protect herself, even if it meant dragging David down with her. The stage was set for a collision of values and privilege, with David's unwavering honesty clashing against Veronica's cunning deceit. For David, this was more than just a test of character. It was a fight for his name, his livelihood, and everything he held dear. And for Veronica, it was a chance to see how far she could push the boundaries of accountability in a world that had always bent to her will. The afternoon sun blazed down on the winding suburban road, as Veronica Chambers reclined in the plush back seat of her sleek, custom black sedan. She was engrossed in her phone, typing furiously as she berated a colleague over a minor scheduling error. David Carter, ever focused, gripped the steering wheel, carefully navigating the road. His job was to ensure her safety and comfort, but the tension in the car was palpable. "Can't you go any faster?" Veronica snapped, barely looking up. "I'm already late." David, calm as ever, replied, "The speed limit is 40 here, ma'am. I'll get us there as soon as I can." Veronica huffed but didn't argue further, returning to her phone. Seconds later, she spotted something in her peripheral vision. Another sleek car passing them on the opposite side of the road. A competitive glint flashed in her eyes. "Pull over. I'll drive," she said suddenly. David hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't think that's a good idea. We're almost there." Her impatience boiled over. "Don't argue. Just pull over." Reluctantly, David obeyed, pulling to the side of the road. Veronica stepped out, her designer heels clicking against the pavement as she circled to the driver's seat. David took the passenger side, his gut tightening. Veronica's driving had always been reckless, a point he had silently worried about but never voiced. The moment the car was back on the road, Veronica floored the gas pedal, her manicured hands gripping the wheel with overconfidence. "This is how you make up for lost time," she said with a smirk. David clung to the door handle as Veronica sped around a curve. A flash of red appeared ahead, a stop sign, but Veronica barely slowed. A pickup truck suddenly emerged from the intersection, its driver slamming on the brakes to avoid a collision. "Veronica!" David shouted. But it was too late. The sedan skidded violently, swerving into a lamppost with a deafening crash. The windshield cracked and the airbags deployed with a harsh burst. The aftermath was chaos. Horns blared, glass littered the pavement, and smoke curled from the engine. Dazed but unharmed, Veronica emerged from the wreckage, her pristine blouse wrinkled but intact. David, shaken but composed, helped her to the sidewalk as bystanders began to gather. The pickup truck driver exited his vehicle, shouting angrily about the near miss. "What were you thinking?" the man demanded. Veronica quickly adjusted her hair and demeanor, adopting an air of authority. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice laced with indignation. "This was not my fault." She turned to David, narrowing her eyes. "Isn't that right?" David froze, his pulse quickening. "Ma'am, you were driving. You saw the stop sign." "Don't you dare," she interrupted, her tone icy. "You're my employee. You were the one responsible for my safety. If you hadn't distracted me with your chatter, this never would have happened." Her words landed like a punch. David stared at her, stunned. "You're blaming me?" Veronica's gaze hardened. "If you value your job, you'll take responsibility. You don't have much of a choice, do you?" Bystanders murmured, their eyes darting between Veronica and David. The pickup truck driver, clearly agitated, pulled out his phone to call the police. "You'll back me up," Veronica hissed under her breath. "Say you were driving. It's just a report. No one will question it. Besides, who do you think they'll believe?" David's stomach churned. She wasn't just deflecting blame. She was orchestrating a lie to protect herself, fully prepared to let him take the fall. As the wail of sirens grew closer, David felt trapped. Veronica's words echoed in his mind. Who do you think they'll believe? She wasn't wrong. In a world where wealth and power often outweighed truth, David's position as a black driver meant he would likely face scrutiny and prejudice. His record was spotless, but that might not matter. The thought of being blamed for an accident he didn't cause filled him with dread. What would this do to his family? To his reputation? To his livelihood? His daughter was depending on him, and a single mark on his record could derail everything he'd worked for. But how could he live with himself if he went along with the lie? Taking the blame meant accepting Veronica's manipulation, allowing her privilege to overshadow his integrity. He had always prided himself on his honesty. It was a value he hoped to pass on to his daughter. The officers arrived, stepping out of their squad cars with authoritative precision. One approached Veronica, who immediately began spinning her version of events. "My driver was behind the wheel," she said smoothly, gesturing to David. "He must have been distracted." David's chest tightened as the officer turned to him. "Sir, is that true?" David opened his mouth to respond, his mind racing. This was the moment. Would he stand by his principles, or would he bow under the weight of Veronica's coercion? His voice came out steady but quiet. "I need to speak to my attorney before making any statements." The officer raised an eyebrow but nodded. Veronica's face twisted in irritation, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. The scene was far from over, but the battle lines had been drawn. David knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time since the accident, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't going to let Veronica's lies define him. Not without a fight. The days following the accident were a whirlwind of chaos, but Veronica Chambers knew how to stay ahead. She had been playing this game her entire life, spinning narratives and leveraging her wealth to come out unscathed. As far as she was concerned, David Carter was just another pawn in her carefully crafted story. Sitting in her opulent living room, Veronica scrolled through social media on her tablet. Headlines blared accusations against David. Driver causes reckless crash, endangering high-profile client, and irresponsible chauffeur nearly costs socialite her life. She smirked. It hadn't taken much to plant the story. A few calls to her publicist, a vague tip to a local journalist, and the narrative had written itself. But Veronica wasn't naive. She knew David could still be a problem if he refused to play along. And so, she devised a plan to ensure his compliance. Veronica called David to her home under the pretense of discussing the insurance claims. He arrived hesitantly, dressed in his usual neat attire, his face drawn with worry. "David?" Veronica began with a saccharine smile, motioning for him to sit. "I've been thinking about how to make this situation easier for both of us." David remained standing, his posture rigid. "Easier?" he echoed, his voice laced with skepticism. "Yes," she said smoothly. "I understand how this could affect your livelihood." She paused for effect, letting the weight of her words settle. "So, I'm prepared to compensate you generously if you take responsibility for the accident. Enough to cover any potential fines plus a little extra for your troubles." David's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I wasn't the one driving." Veronica's smile thinned. "I'm aware of what you think happened," she replied, her tone sharpening. "But the reality is that people believe what they're told, and right now, the story out there isn't in your favor. This is your chance to turn it around, secure your future instead of fighting a losing battle." David looked at her in disbelief. "So you want me to lie? To ruin my reputation just to protect yours?" Her expression darkened. "Watch your tone," she said coolly. "I'm trying to help you. Think about your family, David. Your daughter, wasn't it? What happens if you lose your job? Your house? I'm offering you a way out." Her veiled threat hit its mark. David's mind raced. Veronica's words were a chilling reminder of how easily she could dismantle everything he had built. As the story of the accident gained traction, David found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't control. News outlets painted him as negligent and irresponsible, parroting the narrative Veronica had crafted. Social media wasn't kinder, with comments ranging from outright racist vitriol to subtle but stinging judgments. Typical. They never take responsibility. Why would someone like Veronica Chambers hire him in the first place? David's phone buzzed constantly, but the messages brought little comfort. Friends and acquaintances reached out with hesitant questions, and even his colleagues seemed unsure whether to believe him. At work, the tension was palpable. Though his boss hadn't explicitly reprimanded him, David noticed a shift in how he was treated. Assignments became scarce, and the once friendly camaraderie among his peers grew cold. The financial strain loomed large. Bills piled up as David struggled to maintain his household while dealing with the fallout. His wife Sarah tried to reassure him, but even her optimism began to waver. "David," she said one evening, her voice trembling, "we'll get through this. We always do." He nodded, but the weight of her words felt unbearable. How could he protect his family when the world seemed intent on tearing him down? Each day became harder than the last. David began avoiding public places, unable to face the judgmental stares or whispered conversations. Even mundane errands felt like battles, Stepping into the grocery store felt like walking into a courtroom where everyone had already decided his guilt. One night, as he sat alone in his living room, David scrolled through his phone, replaying snippets of news coverage. The words echoed in his mind. Unprofessional. Careless. The cruel irony was that he had spent his entire life working to prove those stereotypes wrong, only to find himself trapped by them now. The betrayal stung deeply. David had always treated Veronica with respect, going above and beyond to ensure her comfort and safety. And yet, she had turned on him without hesitation, using her privilege to shield herself while leaving him to bear the consequences. He thought of his daughter, Mia, who looked up to him as her hero. The thought of her seeing him as anything less than that broke his heart. "Daddy?" Her small voice startled him. David turned to see Mia standing in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Why are you sad?" He forced a smile, beckoning her over. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking." Mia climbed onto his lap, her innocence a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. "You're the best daddy ever," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. Her words gave him a flicker of hope, but the question remained. How could he clear his name and protect his family from the storm Veronica had unleashed? Despite the mounting pressure, David couldn't bring himself to give in to Veronica's demands. The injustice of the situation gnawed at him, fueling a quiet but growing resolve. He began keeping meticulous records of his interactions with Veronica, jotting down every conversation and incident. He replayed the day of the accident in his mind, searching for anything that could prove his innocence. Late one night, as David scrolled through forums for legal advice, he stumbled upon a suggestion that reignited his hope. Check for dashcam footage. His heart raced. He remembered installing a dashcam months ago, but hadn't thought to review it since the accident. If it was still functional, it might hold the key to his vindication. David rushed to his car, fumbling with the device. As he connected it to his computer, his hands trembled with anticipation. The screen lit up, and the playback began. There it was. Clear as day, the footage showed Veronica behind the wheel, ignoring the stop sign and causing the crash. Her recklessness was undeniable. For the first time since the accident, David allowed himself a small, relieved smile. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. He had the truth on his side, and he was determined to use it to reclaim his life. David's discovery marked a turning point in the battle for his reputation. Veronica's lies might have thrown him into turmoil, but the strength of his character and the undeniable evidence in his hands would soon expose the truth. David Carter sat in the dim glow of his living room, his laptop perched on the coffee table in front of him. His heart raced as he connected the small dashcam device he'd retrieved from his car. The idea had come to him in a moment of desperation, a late-night search for anything that could clear his name. For weeks he had endured the weight of public judgment and Veronica's manipulations. The accusations had left him isolated and fearful, but as he stared at the loading screen on his laptop, a flicker of hope sparked within him. Finally, the footage began to play. The view was slightly shaky but clear, capturing the events of that fateful day from the moment Veronica took the wheel. There it was, the stop sign she had ignored, the sharp turn she had taken too fast, and the sudden appearance of the pickup truck. The recording didn't just show the crash, it revealed the full truth. Veronica's reckless driving had caused the accident. David leaned back, his chest heaving as relief washed over him. For the first time since the ordeal began, he had proof, irrefutable evidence that could dismantle Veronica's lies. The next morning, David sat in his kitchen, staring at his phone. The dashcam footage was loaded and ready to share, but the question lingered. Who should I trust with this? He thought of his wife, Sarah, whose unwavering support had been his anchor. Yet he knew this battle required more than family backing. It needed legal and public validation. After some deliberation, David decided to contact a trusted lawyer he had worked with years ago. The lawyer, Mr. Bradley, was known for his integrity and experience in handling high-profile cases. "David," Bradley said after viewing the footage during their meeting, "this changes everything. This isn't just evidence, it's a game changer." David nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "What do we do now?" Bradley leaned forward. We go to the authorities and ensure this footage is submitted as part of the official investigation. But be prepared. Veronica won't go down without a fight. Submitting the footage to the authorities brought David a measure of relief. It was no longer just his word against Veronica's. The truth was out there. The police reviewed the evidence with great interest, their attitudes shifting as they saw the clear chain of events. The officer who had initially taken Veronica's statement looked visibly uncomfortable as the footage contradicted her claims. "This is damning," the lead investigator admitted. "It's clear she was driving and her negligence caused the accident. We'll need to question Ms. Chambers again." David left the station with a cautious sense of victory. For the first time, he felt the tide beginning to turn. Meanwhile, Veronica was in her lavish penthouse, sipping a glass of wine and scrolling through social media. She relished the public's continued vilification of David, confident her story had taken root. But her confidence wavered when she received a call from her lawyer. "Veronica, we have a problem," the lawyer said, his tone grave. "David has presented dashcam footage to the police. It's incriminating." The glass slipped from Veronica's hand, shattering on the floor. "Dashcam footage?" she repeated, her voice rising. "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "It clearly shows you driving recklessly. We need to strategize immediately." Panic set in as Veronica realized her carefully constructed lies were at risk of unraveling. She couldn't let that happen. Determined to protect herself, Veronica sprang into action. She began calling in favors, reaching out to influential contacts to discredit David before the footage could gain traction. Her first move was to contact a tech expert, offering an exorbitant sum to tamper with the footage. "I need you to create doubt," she insisted. "Anything to make it seem unreliable." The expert hesitated, but agreed, aware of her power and wealth. At the same time, Veronica leaked stories to the press, portraying herself as a victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by David. Headlines began to shift. "Socialite claims dashcam footage is doctored, a desperate move by an accused driver." David, unaware of Veronica's countermeasures, continued to work with Bradley to ensure the truth prevailed. But when he saw the latest headlines, his heart sank. "They're saying the footage is fake," he told Bradley, frustration evident in his voice. "How can they twist this?" Bradley remained calm. "It's a tactic, David. They're grasping at straws. The truth will hold." As Veronica's efforts intensified, David and Bradley worked tirelessly to counter her moves. They hired their own forensic expert to authenticate the footage, ensuring its integrity could not be questioned. The expert's report was unequivocal. "The footage is genuine. There's no evidence of tampering or manipulation." Armed with this validation, Bradley filed a formal complaint against Veronica for obstruction of justice. The move forced her legal team into a defensive position, further eroding her credibility. The tension reached a boiling point as the police scheduled a formal confrontation between David and Veronica. The media buzzed with anticipation, with both camps making final preparations. Veronica, dressed impeccably in a designer suit, arrived at the station with her lawyer, her demeanor cold and calculated. David, though nervous, stood tall beside Bradley, his calm resolve a testament to his character. The interrogation room was a stark contrast to Veronica's usual surroundings, sterile and devoid of luxury. As the dashcam footage played, her facade began to crack. This is ridiculous," she stammered, her voice faltering. "It's obviously been edited." The lead investigator raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Chambers, the footage has been authenticated by independent experts. It's clear you were driving and caused the accident. Do you have any evidence to support your claims?" Veronica's silence was deafening. Outside the station, reporters swarmed as word of the dashcam footage spread. The narrative was shifting, and public opinion began to sway in David's favor. Support poured in from unexpected places: former clients, community members, and even strangers who had seen the footage. For the first time in weeks, David felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. Veronica, however, faced mounting pressure. Her once loyal allies began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with her crumbling facade. The truth was out, and the battle was nearing its conclusion. David's courage, combined with the undeniable power of the dashcam footage, had turned the tide. The discovery of the footage wasn't just a victory for David. It was a testament to the power of truth in the face of deceit. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: Veronica's days of manipulation were numbered. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as David Carter stepped through the heavy wooden doors. Every seat was filled, the gallery brimming with reporters, spectators, and curious onlookers drawn to the sensational case. At the center of the storm sat Veronica Chambers, poised and confident in her designer suit, her face betraying no sign of the mounting pressure. David adjusted his tie, his palms damp with nerves. He had dreamed of this moment, not for the vindication alone, but to reclaim the dignity stripped from him by Veronica's lies. He took a deep breath and locked eyes with his lawyer, Mr. Bradley, whose reassuring nod reminded him that the truth was finally on his side. The judge called the proceedings to order, and Bradley rose to present the pivotal evidence. The room fell silent as he approached the large screen at the front of the courtroom. "Your Honor," Bradley began, his voice firm, "we present irrefutable evidence that my client, Mr. Carter, was not responsible for the accident in question. This dashcam footage will reveal the truth." Veronica's lawyer, a man as polished as she was, rose to object. "We maintain that the footage is doctored and unreliable." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Let's see the evidence first." All eyes turned to the screen as the video began to play. The dashcam footage captured every detail: Veronica taking the wheel, ignoring the stop sign, and speeding recklessly into the intersection. The room seemed to hold its breath as the events unfolded in stark clarity. Gasps rippled through the gallery, and a murmur of disbelief spread as the footage looped a second time. Bradley paused the video at a critical moment, freezing the frame to highlight Veronica's face behind the wheel. "There is no doubt," he said, addressing the court. "The defendant was driving and caused the crash. My client was not only a victim of the accident, but also of a calculated campaign to discredit and defame him." Veronica's confidence visibly wavered. Her carefully constructed facade of composure cracked as whispers of condemnation filled the room. As the evidence stacked against her, Veronica's calm demeanor dissolved into thinly veiled panic. She leaned toward her lawyer, hissing in a low voice, "Do something!" Her lawyer stood, attempting to regain control. "Your Honor, this footage, while compelling, does not tell the full story. There are—" But the judge cut him off. "The footage has been authenticated by independent experts. The court accepts its validity. Ms. Chambers, would you like to explain what we've just seen?" Veronica's face flushed. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The gallery watched intently as her arrogance gave way to fear, her usual air of entitlement replaced by the stark realization that her lies were unraveling. She stammered, her voice faltering. "This isn't... I was under a lot of stress that day. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Her attempts to shift blame sounded hollow, and the judge's stern gaze only added to her discomfort. "Ms. Chambers," the judge said firmly, "the evidence shows a deliberate attempt to manipulate the truth and place the blame on an innocent man. This court takes such actions very seriously." As the courtroom erupted with murmurs of approval, David sat quietly, absorbing the weight of the moment. For weeks he had carried the burden of Veronica's lies, losing his peace of mind, facing public ridicule, and enduring countless sleepless nights. Now, with the truth laid bare, the relief was palpable, but so was the emotional toll. Bradley placed a reassuring hand on David's shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. David nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I just wanted my name back." The judge delivered a sharp reprimand to Veronica, ordering an investigation into her conduct and outlining the legal consequences she faced. Among them was a requirement to issue a formal public apology to David and financial restitution for the damage her actions had caused. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed as David emerged. Microphones and cameras were thrust in his direction, reporters shouting questions. "How do you feel about today's verdict? What message do you want to send to Ms. Chambers?" David took a moment before speaking, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I'm grateful for the truth coming out, but this isn't just about me. It's about standing up to injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition might seem. I hope this reminds people that integrity matters and that lies will eventually be exposed." Though the victory was clear, David couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The damage to his reputation, the strain on his family, and the emotional weight of the ordeal couldn't be undone overnight. As he returned home that evening, his daughter Mia ran to greet him, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Daddy, you're a hero." Her words brought a smile to his face, a reminder of what truly mattered. He hugged her tightly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. For Veronica, the consequences were just beginning. Her carefully curated life of privilege and influence lay in tatters, her name now synonymous with deceit and dishonor. But for David, the moment marked a turning point, a reclamation of his dignity and a testament to the power of truth. As David sat on his porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt something he hadn't in weeks: peace. The fight had been exhausting, but it had been worth it. The truth had prevailed, and he could finally begin to move forward. The days following the trial were a whirlwind for both Veronica Chambers and David Carter, but their paths diverged starkly. Veronica's life, once defined by luxury and social prestige, began to crumble. The courtroom revelation of her lies sent shockwaves through her elite circle. Friends who once eagerly flocked to her glamorous parties now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her public disgrace. Her legal troubles deepened as the authorities launched investigations into her conduct, not only for the false claims against David, but for potential perjury and obstruction of justice. Veronica's once thriving business connections, severed ties, and endorsements she had enjoyed quietly dissolved. The financial fallout was equally devastating. Lawsuits piled up, not just from David, but from others emboldened to speak out about her manipulative tendencies. Headlines read, "Socialite falls from grace, Veronica Chambers faces reckoning." Veronica retreated to her penthouse, now a cage of her own making. The world she had controlled so effortlessly had turned against her, and the woman who had wielded privilege as a weapon found herself isolated and powerless. For David, the aftermath was bittersweet, but filled with moments of healing and redemption. The public, having learned the full truth, rallied behind him. Strangers reached out with messages of support, and old friends who had doubted him came forward with heartfelt apologies. One particularly moving moment came from his employer, who personally apologized for ever questioning his integrity and offered him a promotion to a more senior role in the company. "We owe you, David," his boss had said, shaking his hand firmly. David's career began to rebound, bolstered by the media coverage that painted him as a symbol of resilience and integrity. Endorsements and job offers poured in, but David approached them cautiously, prioritizing his family's stability and peace of mind. At home, his wife, Sarah, and daughter, Mia, provided the emotional support that had carried him through the darkest moments. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Mia beamed up at him. "Daddy, you're the strongest person I know." Her words brought a lump to his throat. The fight had been brutal, but hearing those words made it all worthwhile. The story's impact extended far beyond the individuals involved. Media outlets and public forums erupted with discussions about the implications of the case, shining a spotlight on issues of accountability, privilege, and systemic bias. Commentators debated the power dynamics at play, with many pointing out how easily Veronica's status could have silenced David had it not been for the Dashcam footage. Advocacy groups seized the moment to push for reforms, including better protections for workers in vulnerable positions and stricter penalties for false accusations. David himself became an unwitting spokesperson for these issues, often invited to speak at community events and panels. Though he remained humble, his words carried weight. "This isn't just about one person's actions," he said at a local gathering. "It's about a system that allows those with power to exploit those without. We all have a responsibility to change that." The community around David also grew closer. Neighbors who had once been distant began to check in on him, offering words of encouragement or simple gestures of kindness. The ordeal had exposed the biases lurking beneath the surface, but it had also sparked a collective effort to confront them. As months passed, David found a renewed sense of purpose. He began mentoring younger drivers at his company, sharing his story as a lesson in perseverance and integrity. His focus shifted toward ensuring that others in his profession never felt as isolated as he had. Veronica, meanwhile, faded from the public eye. Her name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked privilege and the inevitable consequences of deceit. For David, the journey had been harrowing, but it had also reaffirmed his faith in truth and justice. Sitting on his porch one evening, watching Mia play in the yard, he felt a deep sense of peace. The scars of the ordeal remained, but so did the lessons. Lessons of strength, accountability, and the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting the fight. Months had passed since the courtroom drama that forever changed David Carter's life. The scars of the ordeal were still there, emotional and professional, but they no longer defined him. Instead, David had found a way to turn his experience into something meaningful, a way to help others who might find themselves caught in the crosshairs of injustice. David now stood at the front of a packed community center, addressing a group of workers, advocates, and young professionals. "The truth isn't always easy to fight for," he said, his voice steady, "but it's worth it. And no matter how powerful someone seems, their lies can't stand against facts and integrity." He had become a voice for fairness and accountability, sharing his story on panels, in workshops, and through mentorship programs aimed at empowering those in vulnerable positions. Each time he spoke, he felt a sense of purpose that helped heal the pain of what he had endured. Meanwhile, Veronica Chambers had faded from the public eye. Her name was a cautionary tale whispered in hushed conversations about the perils of unchecked privilege and deceit. For David, her story was a reminder of the fragility of power built on lies. As he walked out of the community center, his daughter Mia ran to greet him, her laughter filling the air. David scooped her up, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in months. "You're my hero, Daddy," she said, her words echoing in his heart. David smiled, gazing at the horizon. His life was no longer defined by Veronica's betrayal, but by the strength he had found to rise above it. Truth had won, and with it came the opportunity to create a new beginning, not just for himself but for others as well. What would you do if faced with such betrayal? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories of truth and justice.